My name is Noelle, and I was 33 years old when my sister told me, from her couch, 3 days after I came home from abdominal surgery, that she had her own life to deal with. I had asked if she could pick my kids up from school for 1 week. Just the school run, 40 minutes, round trip, twice a day. I was not supposed to drive. I had 2 children, ages 7 and 9, and I had just had surgery, and their father was out of state for work, and my sister lived 11 minutes from the school. She said, "I have my own life, Noelle. I can't just drop everything." I said okay. I called a neighbor. I hung up the phone, and I lay back against the couch cushions and I looked at the ceiling for a while. Because what I was thinking about, while I looked at that ceiling, was the $134,400 I had transferred to my sister's accounts over the preceding 7 years. Her car payments, her utility bills, her childcare. Every month, $1,600, set up as a recurring transfer, quiet as a utility, consistent as a clock. I had kept every record. I had the bank statements going back to the first transfer, and I had not, until that phone call, fully decided what I was going to do with them. 3 weeks later, at our grandmother's 82nd birthday dinner, 12 people around a table, I decided, welcome back to Chaniel, where quiet people let a single printed page change the whole conversation. New here? Subscribe before this ends. And if you've ever covered for someone who rewrote your contribution as something else, drop a 6 in the comments. I want to start with the version of me my sister had been describing to our family for several years, because understanding that version is the only way to understand why what happened at dinner mattered as much as it did. In her telling, I was a person who had done well for herself, fine, comfortable, a good job, a nice house, and who contributed to the family in modest ways when it was convenient for her. Not someone who went out of her way. Not someone who had restructured her financial life around a commitment she had made and kept for 7 years. Just someone who was, in her word, fine. Doing fine. Barely contributing. I am a forensic accountant. I work for a mid-sized firm in Indianapolis that handles financial investigations, fraud examinations, litigation support, insurance disputes. I have been doing this work for 9 years, and the core of it is the same regardless of the case. You follow the money, you document what you find, and you present it in a form that a room full of people can understand without ambiguity. I am very good at this. I have testified as an expert witness 4 times. I am not a person who misplaces receipts. I tell you this because it is directly relevant to the folder I had been building for 2 years before any of this came to a head, and to the fact that when I finally used it, I used it correctly. My sister's name is Petra. She is 2 years younger than me and lives in the same city, Indianapolis, about 20 minutes from my house. She has 2 children as well, a boy and a girl, ages at the time of this story 10 and 8. She had been a single parent since her younger child was 18 months old, when her marriage ended in circumstances that were genuinely hard and that I had enormous compassion for. Her ex-husband was not financially reliable in the years after the divorce. The support orders were inconsistently honored. She was working part-time at a dental office, front desk, good hours but not full-time wages, and managing a household largely alone, and she was doing it with more composure than most people would manage. I want to say this clearly. The situation that started the payments was real. Petra was struggling in ways that were concrete and documentable, and I had the means to help, and I helped. The payments were not charity exactly. I had framed them, at least to myself, as a loan, though I had never put that in writing because I had not wanted to create the kind of awkwardness that a formal agreement between sisters can create. That was my mistake, and I own it. The payments were real, and the need was real, and my compassion was real. What changed was what Petra did with the story of those payments once her situation began to improve. My anchor in this story is my grandmother, Grandma Hilda, my mother's mother, 82 years old, still living in the house she had shared with my grandfather until he passed 9 years prior. She lives in a neighborhood on the east side of Indianapolis where she has been for 38 years, and she is the kind of woman who hosts every significant family gathering at her kitchen table because she understands instinctively that the table is where things get settled. She made pierogi from scratch every Christmas. She called her grandchildren on their birthdays and always remembered the exact age they were turning. She was the family's North Star, and everyone in our family knew it, including Petra. Grandma Hilda and I spoke every Sunday evening, a habit that had started when I moved into my first apartment at 23 and that had continued unbroken for a decade. She knew me well enough to hear things in my voice that I hadn't said yet. She had, over the preceding year, asked me twice in different ways whether everything was all right with Petra and me. I had said yes both times, which was the version of the truth I was still telling myself. I had 2 children of my own, Marcus, 9, and Lily, 7, at the time of this story. Their father, my husband Terrence, worked in regional sales and traveled frequently, 2 weeks out of 4 on average. My household functioned because I ran it with the same methodical attention I brought to my cases, scheduled, tracked, contingency planned. The surgery I mentioned in the opening was for an umbilical hernia repair, not serious in the medical sense, but requiring general anesthesia and a week of restricted activity. I had planned for Terrence to be home. A last-minute client situation moved his travel. I adjusted. I called Petra because she was close, she was family, and I had been sending her $1,600 a month for 7 years. She said she had her own life. The first payment went out the month Petra's divorce was finalized. She hadn't asked directly. What she had done was called me on a Sunday evening, a Sunday which is relevant because Sunday evenings were my grandmother calls. And the fact that Petra was calling on a Sunday told me she had been sitting with something all day and had finally decided to say it. She said things were tighter than she had expected. She said the child support was unreliable. She said she was trying to figure out whether to give up the car, because the insurance and the payment together were more than she could carry, and without the car she wasn't sure how she'd manage the school run and her hours at the office. I asked her what the car payment and insurance came to. She said around $640. I said I could cover that. She said she didn't want me to do that. I said I wanted to. She said, "Are you sure?" I said yes. That was the beginning. Over the following 6 months, the amount grew in the organic way that support grows when the person you're supporting is genuinely struggling and you are genuinely able to help. The utility bills she mentioned once had been a problem. She'd had a shut-off notice. I added $400 to the transfer. The childcare costs were a gap between what she paid and what she got reimbursed. I covered $240 of it. By month 7, the transfer had settled at $1,600 even, and I had set it up as a recurring automatic payment from my account to hers, first of every month. Memo line reading simply, transfer. I want to be precise about one thing. I had not formalized this as a loan. I had thought of it as a loan in the sense that I expected, eventually, as Petra's situation stabilized, for it to be acknowledged and addressed, not necessarily repaid in full, but recognized as something that had been given in the specific context of hardship, and that would be revisited when the hardship lifted. I did not put this in writing. I told myself I would bring it up when the time was right. I never brought it up. What I did do, starting in year 3, was keep records. Not because I had decided to use them. At that point, I was still operating on trust and goodwill, and the assumption that Petra and I had a shared understanding of what the payments were. But because I am, professionally, a person who keeps records, and because something in year 3 had shifted enough that my professional reflexes began operating where my personal ones had been. The shift was subtle, and then less subtle. In year 3, Petra's ex-husband began paying support more consistently, a new employer, a garnishment that finally took hold. In year 4, she moved to full-time hours at the dental office, and then, by year 5, to an office manager position with a salary increase. In year 5, I noticed her car was new, not new to her, new a lease, a model that was meaningfully nicer than the one I had been helping her pay for. In year 6, she took a vacation to Florida with the kids. In year 7, she renovated her kitchen. The $1,600 continued without discussion. I did not raise it. I keep returning to this because I want to be honest about my own role. I did not raise it because raising it felt like asking for something, and I had told myself when I started that I wasn't keeping score. But not keeping score is different from not noticing. I noticed every month when the transfer cleared. I noticed the new car. I noticed the kitchen renovation. I noticed, and I updated the spreadsheet I had been maintaining since year 3, and I said nothing. What I did not notice, or rather, what I learned later, was that Petra had been constructing a narrative about me in the family during this same period. Not a dramatic one. Just a quiet, consistent repositioning. Noelle is fine. Noelle is comfortable. Noelle tends to keep to herself. Noelle has always been a little withholding with the family. Little adjustments to my public image, delivered in the tone of someone offering a balanced assessment. I learned about these from my cousin Diane, who mentioned something sideways at a family gathering in year 6, and from Grandma Hilda, who said one Sunday that she had heard I wasn't involved much with the extended family lately, which surprised her. I said I called every week. She said she knew. She said she was just passing along what she'd heard. I filed that. I added a column to the spreadsheet. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early March. Terrence was supposed to be home by Wednesday. On Monday, he called to tell me a client situation had escalated and he needed to stay through the following Monday, possibly longer. He was apologetic in the genuine way of a man who genuinely regretted the timing. I said I would handle it. I said I always did. I ran the logistics. I arranged for Marcus and Lily to be dropped at school by a carpool neighbor Thursday and Friday. I arranged for my colleague Bev to cover my most time-sensitive case review. I arranged for grocery delivery the day before so I would have food that didn't require standing at a stove. I was prepared for every contingency except the week of school pickup, which I had been counting on Petra to cover. I called her on the Wednesday before the surgery. She picked up after 2 rings. I explained the situation. The surgery the next morning, Terrence out of town, my restriction on driving for 7 to 10 days, the school run, the times, the location, which she knew perfectly well because it was the same school her own children had attended for 3 years. She said, "Oh, Noelle, this week is really not great for me." I said I understood it was an ask, and I wasn't trying to put her out, but that I genuinely needed help, and this was the specific thing she could do. She said, "I have the kids' activities, and I'm behind on some things at work, and I can't really take on extra right now." I said it was 10 days at most. 40 minutes a day. She said, "I hear you, but I have my own life, Noelle. I can't just drop everything every time something comes up." Every time something comes up. I had called her for something like this once in 7 years. I said, "Okay, Petra." 2 words, level, and I ended the call. I lay back on the couch, and I looked at the ceiling, and I was very still for a few minutes. Not with sadness, exactly. With a clarity that had been assembling itself for 2 years and had just completed its final step. I called Bev, who said she would handle the school run without a second's hesitation. I sent Terrence a text that said it was sorted and not to worry. Then I opened my laptop and I pulled up the folder. I had been building the bank statements, the running spreadsheet, the year-by-year summary I had formatted with the clean column structure I used for case exhibits, and I looked at it the way I would look at evidence before a presentation. It was orderly. It was complete. It was, in the language of my profession, airtight. I did not immediately decide to use it publicly. What I decided in that moment was to cancel the recurring transfer. I logged into my bank, found the scheduled payment, and canceled it. It would not go out on the 1st of the following month for the first time in 7 years. The rest of the decision arrived 3 weeks later when Grandma Hilda called to invite me to her birthday dinner. She turned 82 that April. The dinner was at her house, her kitchen table extended with the 2 leaves she brought out for big occasions, the good dishes, the soup course she made from scratch every year. The guest list was the inner family, my parents, Petra and her kids, my cousin Diane and her husband, my Aunt Carol, Grandma Hilda's neighbor Rosaria, who had been considered honorary family for 15 years. 12 people, including my own 2 kids, in a kitchen that fit 12 if everyone was friendly. I said I would come. I went to my desk, opened the folder, and printed 1 copy of the 7-year transfer summary, a single page, formatted the way I formatted case summaries, with the monthly amounts, the running total, and the final figure at the bottom. $134,400. I put it in a plain white envelope. I put the envelope in my bag. I did not tell Terrence what I was planning. I did not tell Grandma Hilda. I drove to the dinner the following Saturday with my children in the back seat, and the envelope in my bag, and the practiced composure of someone who has spent 9 years walking into rooms with information that changes the shape of things. I should tell you about the phone call I had with Grandma Hilda the Sunday before the dinner because it explains something about how the evening went. She called at her regular time, 7 in the evening, and we talked for the first 20 minutes about ordinary things. The birthday preparations, what she was planning to cook, whether Marcus was still interested in soccer. Then she said, in the particular way she had of dropping the real subject into a comfortable conversational gap, "I want to ask you something about Petra." I said, "All right." She said, "She mentioned last week that you've been distant lately, that she reaches out, and you don't always respond quickly. She said she thinks you've been going through something, and she's been trying to give you space." She paused. "I'm telling you what she said, not what I think." I said, "I appreciate the distinction." She said, "So, is there something you want to tell me?" I looked at the envelope in my desk drawer. I could see it from where I was sitting. I said, "There's something I'd like the family to understand. I'm thinking about how to share it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My birthday dinner has everyone together." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm not telling you what to do, Noelle. I never do that." I said, "I know that too." She said, "I will tell you that I'm 82 years old, and I would prefer the things in this family to be accurate. I'm tired of the version of events that's not accurate." I said, "Which version is that?" She said, "The one where you're the one who keeps to herself and barely shows up." She said it simply, not with drama, the way she said things that she had been sitting with for a while. "I know what you've been doing, Noelle. Not all of it, but enough." I did not ask her how. Grandma Hilda had a way of knowing the shape of things in her family without being told the specifics, the way certain women of a certain generation do, through accumulation, through attention, through 40 years of watching how money and silence and loyalty moved through the people she loved. I said, "I'll see you Saturday." She said, "Bring that document you've been thinking about." I didn't ask how she knew there was a document. I just said I would. Grandma Hilda's house in April smelled the way it always smelled for her birthday. The specific combination of her chicken soup and the good candles she brought out twice a year, and the particular warmth of a house where windows have been closed against an early spring chill, and a lot of people are generating heat. I arrived with Marcus and Lily at 6:15. The kids went immediately to find their cousins. I set a bottle of wine on the counter, kissed Grandma Hilda on the cheek, and she held my hand for just a moment longer than a greeting requires and looked at me and said nothing. I set my bag on the bench near the front door. Petra was in the kitchen helping with the rolls. She looked up when I came in and said hi in the easy way of someone who had not registered any change in the status of things between us, because she did not yet know that the transfer had been canceled. It had been 4 weeks since I had canceled it. The first of the month had passed without the payment going through, and she had not called me about it. I noted that. My parents were in the living room. My father is a man who fills a room with his presence without trying, large, warm, opinionated about football and woodworking. My mother is the person who holds the social temperature of any gathering with quiet competence. They both hugged me. My cousin Diane arrived with her husband Keith 10 minutes later. My Aunt Carol, who is my mother's younger sister, settled into the chair near the window that she occupied at every family gathering. Rosaria, Grandma Hilda's neighbor, brought a cake she had made herself. By 7 o'clock, everyone was seated. The table extended the full length of the kitchen. Grandma Hilda sat at the head, as she always did, in the chair that had been her husband's chair until it became hers. I sat to her left. Petra sat across from me, diagonal next to my mother. The dinner was, for its first hour, exactly what it was supposed to be. Soup, then the main course. Grandma Hilda's birthday was acknowledged with a kind of genuine warmth that only accumulates over 82 years of being a person people love. Diane's husband Keith told a story about a home renovation that had gone wrong in ways that made everyone laugh. Marcus and his cousin argued amiably about something sports-related. Lily had seconds of the soup. At some point in the second hour, when the plates had been cleared and the cake had not yet been brought out, my father said, in the benign, conversational way that fathers say things at family dinners, "Petra, how are things going? You seem good." Petra said things were really good, actually. She said the office manager role had opened up a second position she was training someone for, which meant a small team under her now. She said the kids were doing well. She said she was thinking about taking them to the beach that summer. She'd been looking at rentals. She was relaxed. She was genuinely relaxed, the way people are relaxed when they believe the room shares their understanding of things. Grandma Hilda looked at me. It was a small look. Not a signal exactly, more of a permission. The kind of look that says, "The room is ready. Are you?" I reached down and picked up my bag from beside my chair. I took the white envelope out of my bag and set it on the table in front of me. I did not open it immediately. I let it sit there for a moment, in the way that objects on tables sit, visible, unignorable, altering the temperature of a room without doing anything yet. Petra's eyes went to it, then to my face, then back to it. My mother looked at the envelope and then at me with a particular expression of a woman who has raised 2 daughters and can read the geometry of a room with considerable accuracy. I said, addressing the table without raising my voice above the volume appropriate to a dinner conversation, "I want to share something with everyone, since we're all here. It won't take long." My father set down his water glass. I opened the envelope and took out the single printed page. I held it for a moment, and then placed it on the table where the center of the table could see it, not pushed toward anyone, just placed. I said, "For 7 years, from the month Petra's divorce was finalized through last month, I have transferred $1,600 a month to Petra's accounts to cover her car payment and insurance, her utility bills, and her childcare gap." I said it the way I said things in professional presentations, factually without editorializing, giving the information its own weight. The total is $134,400. The page in front of you shows every transfer, dates, amounts, running total, the final figure at the bottom. The table was completely quiet. Not the quiet of a pause between sentences. The quiet of a room full of people who are processing something that has just reorganized the information they believed they had. My cousin Diane picked up the page from the center of the table and looked at it. Her husband Keith looked at it over her shoulder. My Aunt Carol, from her chair at the edge, leaned forward slightly. Petra's color had drained in a way that started at her cheekbones and moved outward. Her hands, which had been resting on the table, had gone into her lap. I said, "I'm not raising this to create a conflict. I'm raising it because I've heard, through a few different people, that the family's impression is that I'm not involved, that I'm distant, that I barely contribute. I'd like the family to have the accurate version of what involvement has looked like from my end." My mother said, quietly to no one in particular, 7 years. Grandma Hilda said nothing. She looked at the page that Diane had set back in the center of the table, and her expression was the composed, resolved expression of a woman who has waited for something to be said and is at peace that it has been said. My father looked at Petra, not with anger, with a particular searching expression of a father trying to understand a thing he had just been given information about and had not had time to fully process. Petra said, in a voice that was working very hard to hold its shape, "It wasn't. There was an understanding that it was just helping out, that it wasn't." I said, "There was an understanding that I was helping because things were hard. I was glad to help. What I'd like the family to understand is that the help was real and it was consistent, and the description of me as someone who barely contributes is inaccurate." Petra looked at the table. Her jaw was tight in the way jaws go tight when the words that want to come out cannot come out because none of them would improve the situation. Rosaria, Grandma Hilda's neighbor, had the social grace to pick up her water glass and study it with careful interest. Diane said, more to the table than to anyone specifically, "I didn't know any of this." My Aunt Carol said, "Neither did I." My father said, slowly, "Petra, is this accurate?" Petra said, "The amounts are yes." The situation was complicated, and I thought I was going to... She didn't finish the sentence. There wasn't a finish to it that would have helped her. Grandma Hilda picked up the page from the center of the table. She looked at it for a moment, the dates, the column of amounts, the total at the bottom. Then she set it back down. She looked at me. She said, "Thank you for being here, Noelle." It was not said to the room. It was said to me, directly, in the voice she used when she wanted something to be understood precisely. I said, "I'm always here, Grandma." She nodded once and looked at Petra in a way I did not analyze at the time, but that Petra appeared to feel in a physical sense, because her shoulders contracted slightly as though adjusting to a weight that had just redistributed itself. I folded my hands in my lap and waited for the room to find its next breath. The cake came out 20 minutes later. Grandma Hilda sang the birthday song when Diane's husband Keith started it, which he did with the social confidence of a man who understood that the table needed something to do. The children, who had been eating at the counter and were largely unaware of what had happened at the adult table, brought the noise level back to something resembling a birthday party. I helped Grandma Hilda cut the cake. She stood beside me at the counter and said, in a low voice, while everyone else was occupied, "You've been carrying that a long time." I said I had. She said, "Set it down now." I said I was trying to. She patted my hand once and went back to the table. The drive home was quiet. Marcus fell asleep in the back seat before we reached the highway. Lily asked if Aunt Petra was okay. I said she'd had a lot on her mind tonight. Lily said she seemed sad. I said sometimes adults have hard conversations and they feel heavy for a little while. Lily accepted this and looked out the window. My mother called that night after the kids were in bed. She said she hadn't known. I said I knew she hadn't. She said she wished I had told her. I said I hadn't wanted to create a division, that I had hoped, for a long time, that the situation would resolve itself through Petra and me directly. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your sister has some things to reckon with." I said I agreed. She said she loved me. I said I loved her too. My father called the next morning. He was not a man who processed things quickly, but when he arrived at a position he had examined, he held it clearly. He said, "What you did for your sister over those years was a significant thing, and I had no idea the scale of it. I want you to know I know that now." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Petra is going to need to make this right." I said I'd leave that between Petra and her own conscience for now. Petra did not call for 11 days. I did not reach out first. On the 11th day, she texted, not called, texted, and said she wanted to talk when I was ready. I said I was ready when she had something specific to say. She called that evening. She was not immediately apologetic in the clean way that apologies sometimes come. She was, initially, explanatory, the same texture as the unfinished sentence at the dinner table. She said the payments had felt like help, like support, not like something she would need to account for. She said she had been afraid that if she acknowledged it as a loan it would change things between us. She said she had told herself I understood the nature of it, that I knew it was informal, that it had never been a financial arrangement exactly. I let her finish. Then I said, "You described me to our family as someone who barely contributes. 3 times, at least, that I'm aware of, while you were receiving $1,600 a month." There was a silence on the line that had a quality I recognized. Not the silence of someone who had nothing to say. The silence of someone who had just lost the argument they had been having with themselves for 2 weeks. She said, "I know." I said, "That's the part one needs you to understand. Not just the money. That part." She said, "I know, Noelle. I know." The relationship did not mend immediately, and I am not going to tell you it did. What happened in the weeks and months following was the slow, non-linear work of 2 people deciding what version of their relationship was available after something like this. Petra made 2 payments toward the balance without my asking, not large, but deliberate, accompanied by texts that said things like, "Working on it, and I know this doesn't cover it." I acknowledged each one. I did not tell her it was enough. Diane took me to lunch 3 weeks after the dinner and said she had been thinking about it ever since. She said she was sorry for the number of times she had relayed the distant Noelle characterization without questioning it. I said she couldn't have known. She said she should have asked. My grandmother called me the Sunday after the dinner, as she always did. We talked for 30 minutes about ordinary things. Before she hung up, she said, "I want you to know the table is always yours too." I said I knew. She said, "Say it like you know it." I said, "I know, Grandma." She said, "Better." Here is the thing I have spent the most time thinking about since the dinner. Why I waited so long. Not why I started the payments, I understand that. The situation was real, and the need was real, and helping was the right thing to do. What I have spent time examining is why I kept going after the situation changed. After the new car. After the kitchen renovation. After I started hearing the version of me that was circulating. Why I kept sending the money and saying nothing. The answer I have arrived at is this. I was afraid that stopping would make it real. As long as the transfer was running, I could tell myself it was ongoing help, that Petra and I had an understanding, that the nature of it would be acknowledged when the time was right, that the silence was temporary rather than permanent. The day I stopped, I would have to admit to myself that I had been helping someone who was actively rewriting the story of my help. And that is a harder thing to absorb than a financial loss. What the ceiling gave me, lying flat on the couch 3 days out of surgery while my neighbor drove my children to school, was clarity. Not anger. Clarity. The kind that arrives when you have been avoiding a thought for long enough that your body finally forces you to be still and finish it. I don't have a clean rule to offer you about how to give money to family. The rules vary by situation and relationship and what you can afford to lose. What I have is this. If you are giving money under an informal understanding, make sure the understanding is actually shared. Not assumed, not implied, actually confirmed between both parties, with enough specificity that neither of you can revise it later into something more comfortable. Because the revision will come. It comes quietly, gradually, in small adjustments to how the story gets told in rooms you're not in. And by the time you notice, the revised version has been running for years. The records I kept were not a weapon I was preparing. They were a form of self-respect, a way of saying, to myself, that what I was doing was real and that it would not disappear into someone else's more convenient narrative. When the moment came, they were ready. I didn't have to fabricate anything or remember anything perfectly. I just had to print the page. That's my story. A recurring transfer, a white envelope, and a birthday table that finally heard the accurate version. Now here's what I want to ask you. Have you ever found yourself keeping informal records of something you were giving, money, time, effort, not because you planned to use them, but because some part of you knew you might need to? What made you start keeping track? Drop your answer in the comments. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.